The beauty and the challenge of playing the violin is that you can place your fingers anywhere. And for most students, the greatest challenge of all is putting your fingers in the right place. But what if there was a way that you could play perfectly in tune from the very beginning? No tapes that aren't very accurate anyway, and make the surface of the fingerboard uneven. And no more teachers losing patience while pushing their students' fingers up and down to try to get them in tune. The ability from the very first day to achieve perfect intonation. Why, it would be a miracle, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. So let's begin. Paganini starts this lesson by asking, why is it so much easier to hear the intonation of someone else? And as is true with most of the secrets of Paganini, the answer is quite simple, once you stop to think about it. It's because when you're listening to someone else, the only thing that you're doing is listening. You're not worrying about holding your wrist straight or what the next note is. You're not worried about drawing a perfectly straight bow. And for so many, you're not nervous. Paganini declared that all of these things and more add noise to what the student hears, and that it is possible for this type of noise to become so loud and distracting that they can't hear anything, even if they otherwise might have perfect pitch. In order to overcome this obstacle, we must learn the first few secrets of Paganini. And then practice each one until they are no longer a distraction. For only in this way will all of your notes be clear and pure, and it will become possible to hear the intonation of your violin better than the audience does. For those who have studied the life of Paganini, if you now look back at some of his public comments that didn't make much sense before regarding intonation, they will now. Paganini's first teacher was his father, who was actually a professional mandolin player. And Paganini began his studies on that instrument first. But it wasn't long before his mother, Teresa, reminded his father, Antonio, that the angel that had appeared at the foot of her bed had declared that her unborn child would become the greatest violinist the world had ever known, not a mandolin player. And Paganini's father, even though he had almost no experience, began teaching young Niccolo the violin. Yet, in spite of this handicap, Paganini quickly discovered the secrets of studying and perfecting each task separately, along with taking each technique way too far, so that when it actually came time to play the violin, everything would be easy, or at least easier. His father was thrilled with Niccolo's progress at first, and based upon Paganini's comments, he began learning intonation using fairly standard techniques. And it is believed that these are the ones that he used, and they are the ones generally followed for the past 300 years by the Romantic School of Music. The student begins by learning how to tune the violin for themselves. For how can a violinist obtain perfect intonation if they are unable to tune their open strings? The next step is to learn the open string melody first song. And it is memorized and practiced until it can be played with confidence and with a straight bow. Then, after practicing it with a metronome, and then with the teacher as a duet, the teacher then double checks the intonation of the student's violin, and they perform it in front of an audience, preferably on a stage with a spotlight, so that the student's very first performance will absolutely be perfectly in tune. I've included a link to this first song, as well as the sheet music and audio files in the description below this video, and MIDI files, so you can alter the tempo without changing the pitch, though some smartphones require an app to read MIDI files, though I'm told there are many free ones. Every violin student should also learn how to play the piano, at least the basics, so they can at least play a single note C major scale before putting their fingers down on the violin strings. If you don't have access to a properly tuned piano, an electronic one is better. By playing the scale on a piano first, the student is able to hear what the notes should actually sound like, as well as the proper intervals between the notes, especially when the student begins playing their scales, which is also a very important part of learning to play with perfect intonation. Don't cheat on your scale studies. At the same time, the student also learns the names of each note, at least in the first position to get started, and the patterns between the fingers. They do this by following the teacher's example and by using flashcards specifically designed for this purpose. And they are absolutely free, without any ads at all, at theromanticschoolofmusic.com. You see, the serious student will learn everything they can, even when they aren't actually playing the violin. After all of this, which is usually only a few lessons, the student then begins putting their fingers down on the fingerboard, accompanied by a piano or the teacher's violin to help them stay in tune. For those who have been through this learning process, you know that this is truly where the hard work begins and the largest amount of time is spent when you're first learning to play the violin. Students are also asked to sing, and some students soon find out that singing before each practice session is the best training of all for both intonation and stage presence, because, once again, they are developing the ability to hear and match notes and perform in front of others without all of the distractions of playing the violin. And by using these techniques, with a rigorous regiment of specialized scale studies, arpeggios, double stopping with open strings, harmonic comparisons, advanced exercises, and a teacher who is willing to practice ruthless and relentless attention to detail while coaching each of the students' fingers perfectly into place over and over ad nauseum, every possible moment of every practice session, without fail, the student will eventually attain perfect intonation in all of the positions. Or not. Yes, Paganini had perfect pitch. Yes, he could tune his violin by silently touching each string while walking out on stage. Yes, he could alter the pitch of all 4 strings up or down while playing a concerto at full speed. And at the same time, remember every last note played out of tune by every musician in the orchestra. Yet, when it came to teaching these things to others, Paganini couldn't do it. Or more accurately stated, every time Paganini tried teaching a student perfect pitch, and or at least perfect relative intonation, he quickly found himself losing patience and becoming abusive, just like his father was to him. And after realizing just how much he loved and adored his own son, Achilles, this is something that Paganini could never do: abuse a child. And this is believed to be, above all else, the real secret why Paganini never published his opus magnum, the School of Paganini, and shared his secrets with the world. For Paganini was not born with perfect pitch, as many assume, and as Paganini publicly alluded to. It was acquired through ruthless torment and deprivation. He may have had a disposition for it, or the rare genetics that help one acquire it, but for him, the ability to perfectly place his fingers on the fingerboard was painfully and abusively earned, and mainly what destroyed Paganini's relationship with his father. You see, Paganini left home when he was only 14 years old. And for the rest of his life, whenever the topic of intonation came up, Paganini would usually become defensive. And when it came to talking about others who had problems with intonation, more often than not, his comments would turn mean. In spite of this, Paganini declared many times that he would soon open a school and change the world with his secrets. Yet he never discovered any way of teaching perfect intonation, at least to the average student, without becoming as ruthless and abusive as his father was to him. And he also never found a way of doing it quickly, like so many of his other secrets. You see, there is no way of going beyond perfect intonation, so that when a student actually plays the violin, it will be easy. And because of this, Paganini died without ever opening his school and without publishing any of his secrets. Instead, they were only preserved by being handed down by two of his students who were naturally gifted, yet at the same time never really appreciated the knowledge that had been given to them, as is true so many times. At the height of Paganini's career, while audiences could only explain his extraordinary talent by saying that he had sold his soul to the devil, Paganini at the same time was dreaming of an angel, bestowed with infinite patience, who could guide each of the students' fingers until they could finally achieve perfect intonation on their own, without all of the suffering and abuse. Well, I am announcing today that after 200 years of waiting, Paganini's dream has finally come true. These are not free, yet they are almost as wonderful as the guardian angel that Paganini dreamed about. And just in case you're skeptical, as you should be, no, I am not receiving any compensation whatsoever for what I'm about to say. I found these on my own because I have also dreamed that there could be some way of knowing if each and every note was being played perfectly in tune the instant you begin playing it. The sad part is, other than professional piano tuners and guitarists, I have met very few musicians anywhere who have ever heard about Peterson Strobo tuners. These are electronic and they run on batteries, but unlike every other tuner in the world, these are for real. And they can clearly show you if the note you are playing is perfectly in tune the instant you begin playing it. Also, how sharp or flat you are, even while playing vibrato. And they are infinitely patient and kind. Yet, For those who do require a tyrannical disposition to help force you to improve, you may wish to add this option. You may laugh, but it does happen. Never forget that every student is unique. With that said, I will now finish the Secret of Intonation that Paganini began over 200 years ago. And with his other secrets yet to come, hopefully it will allow students to finally reach the unbelievable heights that Paganini once dreamed of. The Strobo tuner can automatically sense the frequency of almost any note, and at the same time tell you more accurately than the human ear can hear how sharp or how flat each note really is. And most importantly of all, display it in a way that is instantaneous and clear. If a note is played flat, the display will rotate to the left. If sharp, it will rotate to the right. The farther away the pitch is from the desired note, the faster the display will rotate. But unlike the needles, colors, and numbers of every other tuner, the closer you get to the correct pitch, the easier it is to see. I won't go into it further right now, but the only string on a violin that is actually supposed to be perfectly in tune with a piano is the A string. The other strings, G, D, and E, while almost the same, actually get tuned to perfect fifths, while the piano is not. It is close, but the notes are not the same frequency. And by setting these tuners to violin mode, they become the only portable tuners, I believe, in the world that will actually tune the open strings of a violin correctly. And because of this speed, accuracy, and clarity, the violinist, regardless of what string or position they are playing in or shifting to, is politely reminded with an infinite amount of patience exactly where to place it or where to move each finger. So the learning process can truly be accelerated. It's a unique experience at first, and it takes a few minutes to get used to. But after that, wow. Play a slow, simple scale a few times, and you almost can't help putting your fingers in the correct place. Some might even consider it the ultimate video game. Just think about the advantages of learning correct muscle memory from the very first time you put a finger on a string, and not having to relearn anything later on. Yet, don't allow yourself to become addicted to these tuners or use them during a performance. They are fabulous learning tools for fine-tuning our ears and taking intonation to the next level. And yes, definitely use all of the other traditional intonation techniques and exercises to help you develop and hear perfect intonation. The Strobo tuner can't keep up with every note of a concerto, yet, even while playing fast passages, it's amazing how many times you can notice the display twitch And if you go back and play the passage a little slower, you will almost always find that a note that you thought that you had been playing perfectly all along is actually quite badly out of tune. You just never realized it. The smaller Strobo tuner has a piezoelectric sensor, which means no microphone, and it gets clipped directly onto the D string peg or temporarily on the A peg while you're tuning the G and D strings. The advantages are that it will fit in your violin case. It usually survives after being dropped, but don't drop it, and it's half the price of the larger one. On the downside, the display isn't as big, clear, and responsive, but it is still unbelievably wonderful, especially for the beginning student or for the professional who must tune in a noisy environment, because it allows you to achieve perfect intonation, whether you can hear your instrument or not. Yet, even though it doesn't have a microphone of its own, when you're at home, you can clip it onto some music stands or a very thin piece of wood, and it will actually act as though it does have a microphone. As always, use your imagination and a little common sense. Even though Leopold Auer never had one of these tuners, his philosophy and advice when it comes to intonation is still perfect. Begin playing very, very slowly and perfect your intonation until it becomes flawless. Then, oh so gradually, increase your speed, but only while maintaining perfect intonation. And only after this will you be able to do what is otherwise impossible.